It turned. It turned on its own. The wind wasn't blowing. I checked the trees. I checked them twice. Not a single branch moving in that whole holler. In the vane, the iron rooster up on the ridge post. It swung all the way around. Slow. Deliberate. Like something had a hand on it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning. To when I first come to Elias Crom's shop. My name don't matter much for the purposes of what I'm about to tell you. What matters is that I work with my hands, and I come from a long line of men who did the same. So when I was left the deed to a smithing operation up in the Anstead Bottoms, a stretch of Fayette County, West Virginia, that ain't on most maps newer than 1940, I didn't think much of it. I figured I'd drive up, sort through the tools, maybe auction the property, and be home before the weather turned. That was in October. The property belonged to a man named Elias Crom, my mother's cousin twice removed, who I'd met exactly once at a funeral when I was 9. He stood at the back of the church in Somersville, not crying, not talking to anyone, just watching the casket like he was trying to read something written on the lid. My mother told me on the drive home that Elias made weather vanes. I remember thinking, that sounds like a real quiet kind of work. She passed me his address on a folded piece of paper 23 years later and said, "He left it to you. Don't ask me why." The drive up to the Anstead Bottoms takes you off 2 different state routes and down a gravel road that runs between 2 limestone ridges so close together you feel like the mountain is deciding whether or not to let you pass. The rock on both sides is dark and wet even in dry weather. Some kind of seep in the stone, I figured, though I would later learn there wasn't water involved. The ridge sweats when something is coming through the high atmosphere. That's what Elias's logbook calls it. The high atmosphere. But I didn't know about the logbook yet. I got to the shop at dusk on a Thursday. Low, wide building, dark timber, tin roof gone orange with rust. There was a forge inside I could smell before I opened the door. Iron and ash and something almost like burnt hair if you breathed it deep enough. Tools hung in careful rows. Everything very clean. Elias Crom, whoever he'd been in his final years alone up here, was a careful man. And on every available surface, every windowsill, every shelf, every nail in the rafters, there were weather vanes. I've seen weather vanes, roosters on barns, arrow and compass setups on courthouse cupolas, decorative things mostly. These were different in a way I could feel before I could name it. They were black iron, every one of them. Worked so smooth the surface looked almost wet. And none were shaped like roosters or arrows or any of the usual forms. They were shaped like fingers. A single pointing finger. The kind a man makes when he's directing you to look at something. Some no bigger than my hand. One near the ceiling ridge was maybe 4 feet long, hung horizontal from a pivot so well balanced it moved if you breathed too hard near it. They were all pointing the same direction, north-northeast, up through the gap between the two ridges, toward the high country where the tree line thinned into bare gray limestone and the sky came down close. I told myself it was the prevailing wind. I told myself that for 3 days. I slept the first night on a cot behind the forge, cold enough that the iron of the building ticked and popped as it contracted. I lay there looking up at the ceiling where the big vane turned on its pin, slow, back and forth, not pointing anywhere in particular. Just restless, I thought. Just thermal variance moving the air. I slept fine. That surprised me later. The second day I went through Elias's materials and tools. The iron stock was good, better than good. He had tools I didn't recognize, shaped for purposes I couldn't puzzle out. One top tool that fitted into the anvil's hardy hole was curved in a long, sweeping arc, like the outside edge of a feather, like skin peeling away from muscle. I set it down and didn't pick it up again. On the third morning, I found the commission book. Plain ledger, green cloth cover, locked drawer beneath the workbench. I opened it with a bent finishing nail in about 30 seconds. It was a list of orders going back, by the dates, about 40 years. Addresses in places like Dunmore, Hillsborough, Greenbank, Bartow. The description for every vein was identical. One standard pointer, 18-inch arm, carbon iron, no ornament. Not roosters, not arrows. Pointers. And beside each entry in a column labeled simply HA was a number. The numbers ranged from 1 to somewhere around 40. Most were single digits. 3 entries near the back had numbers circled in red: 31, 37, and 41. I didn't know what the numbers meant. I wrote them down and told myself I'd figure it out later. That evening, while I was heating a piece of flat stock at the forge, one of the shelf vanes near the window swung hard to the left, fast enough that I heard it tick against its stop. Window closed and latched. Door closed. No draft. The vane had returned to north-northeast by the time I looked back at it. Sitting there, quiet, pointing up through the ridge gap like nothing had happened. I banked the forge and went to bed early. I found the second document on the 5th day. A folded sheaf of papers tucked into the back cover of the commission ledger, held with a rubber band so old it crumbled when I touched it. The handwriting was small and crowded. The letters pressed close together like Elias was trying to fit too much truth onto too few pages. He called it the heavy air. I'm going to read you some of what he wrote. The heavy air is not weather in the way people mean weather. It does not come from fronts or pressure systems or the Gulf. It comes from above, from a height that doesn't have a proper name because no instrument has measured it and returned reliable data. The air comes down in columns, usually at night, usually in high country. It carries things with it, things that have been in the upper atmosphere for a long time, things that have had time to adapt. The vanes I build do not measure wind. They are sensitive to the specific signature of a heavy air column. When an event is 72 hours out, the pointer orients to its originating vector and holds regardless of ambient wind. When it's 24 hours out, the pointer becomes difficult to move manually. When it's 6 hours out, impossible. When the air arrives, the pointer spins. The HA number represents entity density in a given column. Low numbers, under 10, represent a thin passage, sparse. High numbers represent something more concentrated. The circled entries I would not take a commission for again. Those properties I would not recommend occupying after dark, October through February, when the high atmosphere is closest. What I have not written in the commission book is what happens when a column passes directly overhead. The things in a heavy air column are not falling. They are descending deliberately. They move with intention. They are searching. They have, as near as I can determine, learned how to have skin. I put the papers down and looked at the big vane on the ceiling pin. It was pointing northeast, same as always. But the angle seemed different, higher, not pointing at a compass direction, but at a spot in the sky, like the vector had tilted slightly upward while I was reading. I went outside. The sky above the ridge gap was the color of old pewter, not a storm color, not quite a cloud color, a color like the inside of something. I checked the commission book for the most recent order. A woman named Dory Suttles on Sewell Mountain Road, 13 days ago. I drove up that afternoon, found the farmhouse, white with a wide porch. The vane was ground-mounted on a post in the yard, iron finger pointing straight up through the gap toward that pewter sky. Not northeast, up. The woman who answered the door was maybe 60, with the kind of calm you see in people who have lived a long time with something they can't change. I asked when Elias had installed the vane. 11 days ago, she said. Had it always pointed straight up like that? She looked at me for a long moment. No, she said. It started pointing up this morning. I asked what Elias had told her to do when it pointed up. She said, "He told me to go. He told me weeks ago. I should have listened." I drove back to the shop fast. The sky above the ridge gap had gone a color between purple and gray that had no business being in an October sky. The trees weren't moving, not a leaf. The whole mountain was holding its breath. Inside the shop, every vein was pointing straight up. Every one. The small ones on the windowsills, the shelf vanes, all tilted on their pivots toward the ceiling, toward the tin roof, toward whatever was above the tin roof. The big one on the ridge beam had rotated 90 degrees and hung there, vibrating with a faint, steady hum I could feel in the back of my teeth. Elias's root cellar was under the floor behind the forge. Hatch with an iron ring pull. I yanked it up and went down a short ladder into a space maybe 5 feet high, packed earth walls, a wooden shelf with oil cans and crackers and a wool blanket. Bolted to the hatch's underside was a bar latch, the kind you can only throw from inside. Elias had spent some time in this cellar. I went down, pulled the hatch, through the bar. For a while it was just dark and the smell of cold earth and iron. I could hear the creak, steady as a clock. I could hear the building settling above me, tick and pop of cooling metal, normal sounds. Then the hum started. Not the vain hum, bigger. A sound coming from everywhere at once. Earth and air and timber. A low cycling tone like a note from the largest pipe organ you've ever heard. So low you felt it more than heard it. Moving through the soil and up through my knees and into my chest in a rhythm. Not steady, searching, like a sonar ping in a great dark depth. Then I heard the footsteps on the roof. I want to be precise about what I mean. Not a deer, not debris. A weight moving across the tin above me with a pattern that was neither hurried nor hesitant. Moving the way a person moves when searching a room they've searched before. Slow, methodical, back and forth, back and forth. And then it stopped in the center of the roof. The tin above the center of the floor began to flex, not tear, not buckle, flex. One point of contact, shifting slightly, redistributing, testing the way a finger tests the surface of water before a hand goes in. In that cellar, the part of my brain that calculates odds had gone completely quiet. There was only stillness and the slow flecks of tin above my head, and the understanding, wordless, absolute, that whatever was up there had learned skin the way a child learns to walk. Imperfectly, still practicing the weight and placement of it, still learning how much pressure a surface could bear before it gave way. The weight lifted. I heard the footsteps move back toward the ridgeline. The great low hum cycled down the way a turbine spins down, and by the time it had gone fully silent, the creek had resumed and a single frog had started calling near the water, and the night smelled like cold rock and pine resin and nothing else. I stayed in that cellar until full daylight came in around the edges of the hatch. I came up in the gray morning. The vanes were resting, pointing northeast again, in that way that seemed more like a posture than a direction. The posture of a thing that is watching and patient. The tin roof had one place where a seam was pressed outward, not a puncture, a depression, maybe an inch deep, where the metal had yielded under a pressure applied just long enough to leave a mark. One point of contact. I have since driven back to the valley, sat in a diner in Oak Hill, eaten scrambled eggs and looked at an ordinary sky over an ordinary parking lot and felt not exactly fine, but present, grateful for flat ground and close horizons. I did not sell the shop. Elias's notes have more, much more, about which months are safe, about the elevation above which you should never sleep with a window open, October through February, about what the HA numbers actually measure, and what it means for a thing to have been in the high atmosphere long enough to want something. Elias Crom lived alone in that shop for 31 years, right below the ridge gap, the most direct approach from the high country. He slept on a cot next to a latched cellar hatch and spent his days making instruments to warn other people. And he did this for 31 years without ever telling anyone what the instruments actually were. His commission book has 214 entries. 214 black iron fingers pointing skyward in properties across the back country of Fayette, Greenbrier, and Pocahontas counties. I wonder how many of those people know what they have. How many are still upstairs, near a window, in November, with a vein down in the yard they think was there when they bought the place. I've started answering the shop phone when it rings. People calling Elias's old number, asking about the vein on their property, asking why it won't follow the wind. I tell them to check the direction the pointer is leaning. If it's pointing northeast, they have time. If it's pointing straight up, they don't have much. I haven't figured out yet how to say the rest. How to say, what your vein is measuring is a column of descent, and in that column are things that have been in the cold air above the jet stream longer than is comfortable to think about. And in all that time, they have been learning temperature, learning pressure, learning what it feels like to be made of something denser than air, learning what it feels like to have skin. Last night the big vein moved. I was at the workbench when I heard it shift on its pin. That small, precise tick of iron finding a new position. I looked up. Northeast, same as always, but the angle had changed. Not pointing at the gap in the ridges, pointing at a spot in the sky above the gap, maybe 15 degrees above horizontal. I went to the window and looked up. Stars out over the ridge, clear and cold. And in the gap between the two limestone walls, in that narrow corridor of open sky, there was a place where the stars seemed slightly less bright than the others. A patch, a density, a shape that was almost not there at all. And then it moved. Not fast, not like a bird, like something becoming aware that it has been noticed, like something recalibrating. I closed the shutter, sat down, listened to the vein hum against its pin. I stayed there until morning. The last entry in Elias Crom's commission book, written in a hand less steady than the rest. No name, no address, no date. Removed vein from post. Column arrived 6 hours early. Did not wait for me to sleep. It was learning patience, but it has learned enough. That's where the handwriting stops. Good night now. Sleep easy. Winds from the southwest tonight. Should be fine.